We're continuing on Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim on the halachot of Sefer Torah, Siman Kuf Nun Gimel, and we're up to Seif Chaf Aleph on Daf Mem Amud Aleph of the regular prints of Mishna Berura, and Shulchan Aruch writes, this is brought in the Beit Yosef from the Tshuvot of the Maharil, one of the late Rishonim, that the Sefer Torah שהוחזק שהיה של אבותיו של ראובן אין הציבור יכולים להחזיק בו, just like we mentioned in Seif Chaf, that a Sefer Torah that has been in a family and it belonged to the forefathers of a certain individual, the tzibur cannot take it away from that family, it belongs to that family. And en liknot me'ilim shenishtamesh bahem hediot leishtamesh letashmish kedusha. The next halacha is that you can't just go and get any garments to create a cover for Sefer Torah. You know, we have items that we use, even the Sfaradim, they have a mitpachat, they have a nice cloth that they use to cover the Sefer Torah when it's left open. When they say the bracha rishonah, we learned this before, that when you want the Sefer Torah to be open to save time, but nevertheless you don't want to be looking at the ktav when you say the first bracha of Asher Bahar Banu, so you cover it with a cloth. And that's you see many other Sephardi shuls, they have that. And of course, by the Ashkenazim also they have that, plus on top the fact that the actual cover of the Sefer Torah is not a box, but it's also made out of material of the garments. So that is not allowed to be made out of a clothing that has been used for hediot. If you have a scarf on your head and now you want to donate it to the Beit Knesset for the Sefer Torah, that's not something that is respectful. That's not something that you should be doing. And again, this is something we discussed earlier on, for those who remember, in Siman Kuf Mem Zayin, but in the Ramah, but says the Mishnah Berura, of course, you cannot get something that used to be used for avodah zarah. In other words, imagine if they have a yard sale, a garage sale for a church, or you find something online that was used in a temple of some sort, and now you want to get it for the Beit Knesset. Of course, that's not something that is respectful, and therefore it's asur. You cannot do that. In that case, even if you did it already, it's asur to use it, and you have to sell it. You sell it and you go to buy another one. Now, the Mishnah Berura seems to clearly say that only things that are for avodah zarah, b'di'evet does not work, but things that if you have your scarf as a kisui rosh and now you want to give it to the Sefer Torah, if you already gave it, it's not necessarily asur b'di'evet. And if you bought it second hand for tashmishei kedusha, you don't have to go sell it and use the money to buy a new one. But again, Chacham Obadia is a little bit more stringent over here than the Mishnah Berura. Chacham Obadia writes that even if you bought a second-hand scarf from eBay and you donated it to the Sefer Torah, you should not be using it. You return that and you buy a new one for Sefer Torah. So says the Mishnah Berura, Tashmish Kedusha, aval le-mitzvah shari. But if you want to just do a mitzvah, that would be mutar. It's only for Tashmish Kedusha that this is a problem. For Sefer Torah dedication, it's a problem. But if you want to do a mitzvah with it, any other mitzvah, you want to buy some garment and then make it tzitzit out of it, that's Tashmish mitzvah, that's fine. You could buy it second hand, even if it was used for hediot beforehand, that would be mutar. Now, says the Mishnah Berura, Sifrei Psulim shel Ovdei Gilulim shemuchram b'shiraim lenoi. If you have goyish scrolls that they have them wrapped in beautiful garments for beauty, en likach shiraim lasot mein talit, that you cannot even use for talit. That already is from avodah zarah, for noy of avodah zarah coming to a mitzvah, that is ma'us. That's very distasteful. To take something of avodah zarah and make a beged of mitzvah, it's like almost like a mitzvah abba ba'avera. It's not something that you want to have, in your portfolio of doing mitzvot, and therefore that you should not do. Of course, it is asur, as we mentioned before, to use tashmishei kedusha for sefer Torah and so on. ועל כן אסור לקח הכריכות ולכורכן על ספרי קודש שלנו. You cannot buy those garments, those cloth, and use it to wrap the sefer Torah or any other sifrei Tanakh either. Now, the Shulchan Aruch said, the Ramah rather says, asur la'asot me'etnan zona o mechir kelev davar shel mitzvah. If you have etnan zona o mechir kelev, which means you have a payment of an immoral act, which the Torah itself prohibits those two payments to be brought for anything in the Beit HaMikdash. You cannot bring etnan zona, you cannot bring mechir kelev, the exchange of money for a tamei animal being a dog. So it says the Mishnah Berura, it's not only for mikdash that's asur. It's not only in the time of Beit HaMikdash that you can bring a korban or you can donate that money to the Beit HaMikdash, but rather, even nowadays, to create a dvar mitzvah from etnan zona or mechir kelev also would be a problem, because the pasuk says, Lo tavi etnan zona or mechir kelev bet Hashem Elokecha, ki to'avat Hashem Elokecha. Right? It's an abomination for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore, it's a isur derabanan, at least, that you can't use it for dvar mitzvah in that way either. Fine, that's what the Ramah writes, that you cannot use it for dvar mitzvah, כגון בית כנסת או ספר תורה, ודווקא מאתנן עצמה. אבל אם נתנו לה מעות באתנן, if there was money exchange for the immoral act, ומותר לקנות בהם דבר מצווה, then if she bought דבר mitzvah with it, that's not already considered, etnan zona. Etnan zona means if there was something that was given to her, for instance, a cloth was given, and you want to donate that cloth to the Sefer Torah, that's already a disgrace. But if it was money exchange, that already in our scenario, that would not be asur, right? If it was money and then something was purchased with it afterwards, that's not asur to be used for mitzvah necessarily. But if the payment itself was, let's say, a cloth, and now they want to dedicate this cloth to be used for Sefer Torah or for Sifrei Kodesh, that's asur. Or for mitzvah, that's asur. It's isur derabanan, because the biblical prohibition, which covers much more than just this, would be bringing a korban to the Beit HaMikdash. We don't have that, unfortunately, nowadays, but using it for mitzvah also would be isur derabanan. Okay? Now, anything that they receive directly as a payment would be asur. If you gave her a teleh, like the case of Yehuda and Tamar, you give a sheep, a goat, v'noten la'arbe, kulam asurim. Even if you said, I'm going to give you one sheep, and then you end up giving 5 sheep, so then it will be all 5 of them are asur, because they're all given, even though that they were addition, still it will be all asur. The kulam betorat etnan ka'atula will all be prohibited. Now, if they didn't give it with schar bitul malachta, that's a different story. The Kaf HaChaim discusses that. But the isur is only when they gave the etnan prior to the immorality. But if it was afterwards, that would be a little bit different. Again, this gets into the details of the halachot of etnan zonah. Hopefully these are not things that we deal with in this generation, even though the Rambam writes at the end of Perek Chafbet of Yisraeli that there's not a generation that this area of halakha is not the hardest thing as a communal level to be careful. Rambam warns us that in the end of Hilchot Yichud, right? They think, we're big boys, Yichud is not a big deal. But the truth of the matter is, Rambam says, every single generation, from time immemorial until now and ad biyad goel tzedek v'ad bichlal, the greatest challenge of a community as a community is to have proper boundaries of moral stand in these areas of halachas. Therefore, it is something to be careful. Rambam writes that the Gedolei Tanaim and Amoraim, they would be very openly talking about how a person has to be careful, including telling their students, be careful that I should not be secluded with this person, with that person, even relatives. And that's something important, says the Rambam, because they wanted to break the ice to say that there's nobody that's above this. There's no big boys, so to speak, around this area of halakha, and that's really something important to bear in mind and to keep in mind as well. So says the Mishnah Berura, Kegon bet Knesset, you can't give etnan zona or mechir kelev to the Bet Knesset, if you got material, beams and stones and so on and so forth as a payment, you cannot donate that to the Bet Knesset to be used for building a shul. Or Sefer Torah, if she received klaf, parchment, and now she wants to donate the parchment for a Sefer Torah or mezuzah, that's also a problem. Or same would be with getting cloth and using the cloth for mapot of Sefer Torah. All of that will be asur. Now, says the Rema, we're finishing the Rema over here. If you bought something with the money that was payment of immorality, of zonah, then it's lo mikri zona. This is not considered zona ela isur erva. אבל אלו פנויות הקדושות שמקדישות דבר מותר לקבל מהן. That again is a detail in the halachot of what is considered etnan and what is considered zona, which we are not going to get into the details of the Mishnah Berura over here. But nevertheless, says the Shulchan Aruch, Adam shu ragil, this is Sif Chafbet now, shu ragil b'shum mitzvah, kigon glila. If a person is used to doing a mitzvah in the shul, he always does glila, he always does hagbah, right? Ve'ero ones or oni, and now he can't buy it anymore because he had a bad year. His nechasim were lost, or he went bankrupt or whatnot, or he was not feeling well to be there, and people started giving it to somebody else, and then afterwards he became rich again, and now he wants to go back to have the chazakah on the mitzvah that he was doing, and he wants to buy back the mitzvah, so to speak, and the other person doesn't want to give it up. When the kahal gave the mitzvah over to the second person, if he still could have afforded the yearly payment that he would pay for this mitzvah, but he just didn't want to do it because he was not as wealthy, and therefore he wanted to preserve his resources until he is back on his feet completely. And therefore he was part of the decision. He was okay with the kahal giving it to the second person. Then he has lost that zchut, and therefore he can't complained about it. But if he couldn't afford it, he literally was bankrupt. He couldn't afford it. He wanted to, but he couldn't afford it, and now he's back on his feet, and he could afford it now. He's open to giving what he was giving before, and he wants his mitzvah back. Then, says the Shulchan Aruch, then he could take it away from the second person and return things to the status that they had before, that he had the chazakah of doing this specific mitzvah and paying a certain amount of money for it to the Bet Knesset on an annual basis. That it could be enforced actually to return the mitzvah to the person that originally had the chazakah. Now, of course, we're talking about the case that the chazakah happened b'reshut hakahal. Back in the day, they used to sell these things on yearly, annual basis, and this guy for 30 years has been buying it. You are Hagbah, this guy is the Hagbah guy, right? He's the one that does it every single Hagbah. That's how they used to sell it. It was not like every day selling Hagbah. It was like, from Rosh Hashanah and Kippur, they would sell all the Hagbah, all the Ticha of the year, right? And this person could have given it different ones. But this was his mitzvah, that he paid, exorbitant amount of money to be able to be zocheh to that. So that's, of course, with Bershut HaKahal, that's with the permission of the Tzibur. And the Radbaz, Rabbeinu David ben Zimra, writes in his Shuvah that afilu lo yirshu beferush elakot sheyachzik siman rav v'shatku, even if they didn't say, oh, b'chavod, you do it, but they were quiet. They sold it, this guy got it, and people were quiet, and he was doing it for years. They can't go back and say, oh, well, we don't want you to take it back. He could take it back against the will now, because he had it with the permission of the kahal for all those time, for all those years, so therefore he could enforce it now when he's back on track. Now, the Stechemet writes that if a person just started doing Hotza'ah, Hagba'ah, Sefer Torah without the permission of the Tzibur, right? And the reason is because he sits by Aron Kodesh and he jumps after Kaddish right away, opens the door. That's how it happens. That's not the chazakah that he has, is not a chazakah, because people didn't say anything about it because they just want to have shalom. But it's not that they were okay with it, with him doing this, and therefore they could give it to someone else if they want to necessarily do it. Now, the Sechemet writes that that's only if nobody could say anything. Well, if they could have said something, they could say, oh, well, we don't want you to do it every day. Just because you sit next to Aron Kodesh doesn't mean that you should be getting up and doing it first. But they didn't say anything. I was okay with it. Okay, fine. So he does it. He's the closest one. Darkei Shalom. They didn't say anything. Says this Nechemet. Then his chazakah is actually a chazakah. Even though that it was just practicality that worked out, that he's the closest person and he did it, doesn't mean anything. He still will have chazakah, meaning the fact that they could have, should have, would have said something doesn't mean anything. They didn't say anything. At the end of the day, they were okay with it. They let him do it, and therefore he keeps his chazakah, says this Techemet, and he could now enforce that he should be the only one to do it. So that's something important that basically concludes Siman, the long Siman of Kuf Nun Gimel, and now we're going to be dealing with Tashmishei Kedusha, all the Sfarim that we have nowadays, all the things, most of the things that we deal with are Tashmishei Kedusha. It's an important topic. We're going to start Be'ezrat Hashem in Siman Kuf Nun Daled in the days to come. Chazak u'Baruch.